Hello and welcome to the very first PurpleArmy podcast with myself, Ross McGregor, Graham Thompson and Stephen McClellan. In this episode we will look back at the playoff final weekend, including the fan forum, discuss the past year from a clan perspective, and take a look ahead to August, the Champions Hockey League and a new Elite League season. I'm joined now by Graham Thompson, also known as Clantastic on Twitter, and Stephen McClellan, as everybody knows, as Stephen Clan fans that does the game updates. Stephen and I usually do game updates from across the arena most of the games. How are you doing, gentlemen?
Doing fine, thanks, Ross.
I'm fine as well, thanks, Ross.
Graham and myself have been talking about doing a podcast for about 6 months, and I think it was more in the hope that somebody else might take up the mantle, but it just never happened. We had a conversation down at the playoff final weekend and decided just to go for it. Is that right, Graham?
Yeah, that's right. I think the idea is obviously there's lots of podcasts out there, most of them very good, one or two in particular extremely good. I make a point of listening to them every week. And the thing, especially with the season that we've had, the thing for me personally that was kind of missing was an independent Braehead Clan fan point of view of things. There's lots of official output from the club, which is great. I just thought I personally thought there was some room for some more independent output to be out there.
And Stephen, we invited you on because obviously you're quite a prominent person as far as Twitter's concerned. You do game updates for all the home games every week. Are you quite happy to be involved in this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. I was of the same opinion that this is one of the few things that the club is lacking. You know, you've got things like A View from the Bridge and The Cat's Whiskers, which are really prominent for Belfast and Nottingham. I'm just glad to be a part of something like this for Braehead.
We'll see how it goes. We're not promising to be ultra professional to start with, but we'll do our best, and I'm sure it can only improve in time. We're just a week away from attending at the playoff final weekend. The first game itself, we saw Sheffield narrowly beating Hull. Graham, what's your thoughts on that game?
I thought it was a great game. I really enjoyed it. I was obviously having been at the Hull Braehead, the two Hull Braehead games the previous weekend, and still suffering from severe heartbreak from that. The danger was always that Hull were going to struggle against Sheffield, and they didn't. They were, for most of the game, were as good as Sheffield, I thought. Made a real game of it, and it was highly entertaining stuff. And the ending was just, it was just scripted, wasn't it? With the goal in the last few seconds, it was incredible.
Yeah, I felt myself Hull were quite unlucky. Sheffield just seemed a bit flat in that game. I thought the call, it was a penalty, that was called in the last few, I think it was 30 odd seconds to go, if my memory serves me correctly. I mean, it was a penalty, but do you call them in a playoff semi-final with that short a time to go? Did you think that was fair, Stephen?
I was sitting centre ice for this, and from where I was sitting, it looked a bit soft. I mean, there was contact made, but I think Omar Pasha's reaction to the call being made summed it up pretty well. He was absolutely furious in the penalty box. Would it have been called in the first minute of the game? I don't think so. I think it was really harsh on Hull, who had played a very good game. There was some really good goals scored in that game as well. Tanaka's goal from a weird distance, I thought they'd done enough to maybe sneak it into overtime, but that's why Sheffield were the champions this season. It was moments of that from Matthew Waugh with 3 seconds to go, I think it was, just to put the game beyond doubt.
Graham, what were your thoughts on that penalty getting called?
Well, I share the same view. I think the problem is, obviously, when something like that happens, and all conspiracy theorists have a field day with that. And, I like a good conspiracy theory myself as much as anybody, but it'd be a shame for that to kind of overshadow the reality of the game, which was that both teams made a cracking game of it. Let's be honest about it. I think Sheffield, we'll talk about the final shortly, obviously, but Sheffield, they've been overall probably the best team throughout the season. These last few second goals with Raab, which he'd done previously just a few weeks earlier, that's the sort of thing that wins games and gets you to where you want to get to. That's just what happens. So yeah, personally, I thought it was a soft penalty, but they happen. And it's done and dusted now.
I think we're all in agreement that Hull were a bit unlucky, and it just goes to show that when we went down to to play them in the quarter-finals. That, you know, Hull can play a good game. They've got some quick forwards. I think maybe their only issue could be that they're kind of restricted to two-line hockey. That the threat comes from two lines, like most other teams, I suppose, in the league. But when they're on their game, they can certainly give anybody a run for their money. So it's difficult to tell if it was Hull playing Sheffield well or Sheffield just looked a bit flat. Moving on to the second semi-final, we saw Coventry beat Belfast 3-2 in a shootout. What was your thoughts on that one, Stephen?
I didn't particularly like this game very much. I thought it was a bit flat and boring as compared to the first semi-final. From what I remember, and by this point I'd had maybe one or two more beers than I should have, it was a very defensive game, and the most notable part for the game for me was Westgarth dressing and not playing, and then the whole rumour about him signing for us. But from a game point of view, I was rooting for Coventry just because there was 3 ex-Braehead players playing for them. By the time it got to overtime, it's just, you could tell that the crowd just weren't into it as much as they were the first semi-final, and it was a bit of a flat atmosphere as well. It was a bit of a flat game.
Yeah, I think that much is true. I kind of agree with most of that stuff. I think the thing with Westgarth is, I mean, a lot of the time, the fans don't know. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know if he was carrying some sort of injury and he dressed as an emergency. We don't know if there's an issue between him and Thornton. It's just things that fans never get to find out, generally speaking. Graham, what about you? What was your thoughts on the Coventry-Belfast semi?
Yeah, much the same. I can't really add much more to that, to be fair. My interest was wandering during the game. It was clear that both teams were trying not to make mistakes, which usually leads to a fairly dull contest. But ultimately, I think I was glad to see Coventry get through. I had a feeling about Coventry prior to the weekend. I think the thought was that they were definitely, you know, the form team. Certainly between themselves and Giants. But you never know, as I say, Giants being, you know, the class act that they are, even after the season that they've had, there was always a possibility that they would go through. But yeah, I was glad Coventry did it. But to be honest with you, in terms of the game itself, I'm struggling to actually recall anything other than Tendler's attempt at a penalty shot during the shootout, which didn't work out too well. I'm really struggling to come up with any particular memorable moments, to be fair.
Yeah, I felt it was a bit of a flat game for some reason as well. We'll probably skip past the third, fourth place game because although it was an 8-6 win for Belfast, it was a bit better than the one that we played in last year. I think they took it slightly more seriously, but even at that, I think the third, fourth place game, I think they need to look at that and try and get something else in place, although I'm devoid of ideas as to actually what. You get any thoughts on that, Graham?
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, I've been a critic at the third, fourth place game for a while now, obviously, and I think the fact that it's so openly ridiculed, it was even ridiculed at the fan forum, obviously sends a message out to everybody that something needs to happen to change it. There's lots of ideas about potential replacement events, some good, some a bit pie in the sky perhaps, but I can't believe that somebody somewhere can't come up with something more entertaining than the third, fourth place game. Frankly, because I remember when Clan were in the third, fourth place game last year against Fife, I found it all a bit embarrassing, to be honest with you, and I kind of felt for the players as well. When your own team's involved, I just think I don't think it's a good advert for the sport. I think when you've got an event, as I said, that's openly ridiculed, that's not healthy for anybody. And whether it's a Scotland-England type game, some junior type game, any other spin you can put on things, I'd rather see shoot for loot rather than a third and fourth place game, to be honest with you.
Stephen, you get any thoughts on that game?
I didn't go to the third, fourth game this year because last year I went just because Braehead were in it, and I found that if a game's going to make me not care about a Braehead 5 game, it's not going to be worth my while, you know. So me and my girlfriend and my friend went to the park across the road from my hotel and fed some ducks instead. Anything else should be brought in instead, even if instead of spreading the awards over the weekend, like they did when Finner was announced as coach of the year on the Saturday, just have them all before the game, the final, you know, just a wee quick ceremony, something like that, or as you said, like a Scotland v England game, juniors game, anything at all.
I didn't actually go to the third, fourth place game until about halfway through the second period. The Fife fans will be glad to know that my wife wanted to go shopping, and we all love shopping. But the shops were shut because it was a holiday weekend. We'll move on to the final, Coventry 4, Sheffield 2. I actually thought that was a much better game for a neutral to watch. And again, like Stephen said, I was kind of rooting for Coventry, not because of getting majorly against Sheffield, just because there was 3 ex-Clan players. And I was quite pleased with the outcome of that. Yourself, Stephen?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good game. A bit of a shock as well, because I don't think anyone was expecting Coventry to be 4-0 up by the end of the second. It was a really flat performance again from Sheffield up until the first goal. And I don't know what happened this weekend. I think everyone was expecting Sheffield to run away with it, but the fact that Coventry managed to dig deep and pull out a bit of a shock result was good for the game.
What about yourself, Graham? Your thoughts on the final?
Yeah, much the same. As I said earlier, I had a feeling for Coventry for the weekend, and I was happy to see them claim the big prize. Likewise, I think taking a 4-0 lead, I think the danger then obviously was the fact that it was game over at that point, and fair play to Sheffield. They came back and did make a game of it, and let's be honest about it. During that third period, I think probably most people in the arena thought that, and watching at home probably thought that Sheffield were going to stage one of those comebacks again. So I think, it was a great game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it was a good advert for the sport. And to be honest, I haven't even had time to watch it or fast forward through some of it again since I've got home from the weekend. But I'm looking forward to doing that. I'll do that when I get a chance this weekend. But yeah, good game, good advert for the sport, and very pleased that Coventry won. Yeah,
it's always nice to see somebody else different winning, as I said, and I think for the sake of the future, when we're getting 4 teams down, the fans of each team will have a good indication that if they get there, they have a chance to win the whole weekend, and that can only be a good thing. Because I think one of the winners, and although I know this is a Braehead Clan podcast, but I think one of the winners in the weekend were the Braehead Clan fans themselves. They created a lot of the atmosphere. Do you get any thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed myself. I was sitting in section 15, and when I got to my seat on the Saturday and Sunday, I had to move about 20 balloons just to get into it, and it was good watching it this year. I've only been to playoffs twice, last year and this year. It was good last year, but it was also really nerve-wracking, because obviously I had a big interest in how the Clan were going to do, whereas this year I could just sit back, enjoy it, just have a laugh with my friends and not need to worry about the hockey as much. And all the chanting and singing, if it wasn't for that, then it would have been like a trip to Belfast or something with just absolutely no atmosphere at all. I'm glad we made the most of it, and I'm glad everyone else seemed to enjoy all our singing and chanting, and even the Belfast fans who were sitting beside me, there was a couple, they joined in as well.
Graham, what about your summary for the playoff final weekend?
Yeah, well, I would agree on the Clan fan side of things. I think we'd sold something like 1,300 tickets for the weekend, and I think if any more than 100 decided not to bother going, then I'd be surprised, and hopefully those hundreds maybe regretted it. But I think, it was great. I think the Clan fans, they certainly made the atmosphere on both days. But yeah, great for the club from that point of view. And I agree with Stephen. It was a very relaxing weekend from the point of view that the team wasn't there. But I'm sure, given the choice, we'd rather have the team there and have nerves shredded rather than just a good old sing-song. But hopefully that will be next year. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the weekend. I know there's a lot of calls for the change to the format and try and do something more in line with other leagues where they have 3, 5, 7 game playoff series. I would tend to think that those would be good, but obviously there's problems with arena ice availability and what have you. But let's be honest about it, that weekend is a fantastic weekend to get the fans of all teams from around the country together. 7,000 fans, no trouble, certainly not that I was aware of. Great atmosphere, great social event, as well as watching some good ice hockey. It's just a fantastic weekend, and I would be sorry to see that change. So, I think if they keep it to that same format, I wouldn't be upset.
Well, you're touching on something we're going to go into now, and that the format for, you're talking about the 5 or 7 game playoff. I think hard for us to do. You heard Todd Kelman at the Fans Forum saying, it cost Belfast Cardiff £7,000 to travel to Belfast for one game. If you can imagine that in a 5 or a 7 game series, it's just not sustainable for the league at this point in time. Although it would be the absolute preference, you're right about the actual weekend itself. You would lose that weekend, which I think would be a shame, because there's a lot of money, a lot of goodwill is generated at that weekend. And that brings us nicely on to the fans forum. The DOPS again came up in the fan forum. I mean, my personal opinion of DOPS is that it's a good system. I just don't know if it's worked the way that they intended it to work. I think there are issues with it. It seems to be inconsistent, but that could be to do with the changing people that are on the panel. I mean, there's a pool of Europeans, North Americans that they're called upon to adjudicate on these incidents, and I feel that it could be a different way of looking at it. It could be if there's a predominantly European panel looking at something, might look upon it differently from a North American. That could be one of the reasons for the inconsistencies. And I think as fans, we should realise that it can only evolve and get better as time goes on. Stephen, what's your thought on the DOPS system?
Well, I really hope that you're right about it getting better as it goes on. When it was first introduced, I thought, this is the way forward. It's the NHL style, the presentation with a video explanation, what's going on. And, well, I agreed with it at first. As the season wore on, it wasn't working, I think the first one was the Edinburgh ban. I want to say it was Flemington or Emerson, who got banned for 10 games just because there was no video of it. Kind of set the tone for a season where things just didn't seem to be working properly. And obviously we can look at things from a Braehead perspective, where it just seemed things were not so much going against us, but there was just one or two where you'd sit back, watch the video and shake your head at it. From the video I saw, Todd Kilman and Neil Black and Steve Ward all were in agreement that improvements and tweaks had to be made. And if we can get them going forward and everyone can agree on a better system, then hopefully next year all teams will benefit from a fairer and more consistent panel.
I think Todd did touch on, you're talking about, I think it was Emerson and the lack of a video from Edinburgh. He touched on that by saying, there used to be videos would go missing in the train and go missing in the post. I think, although I didn't completely agree with that decision, I think the idea behind it was they were trying to clamp down on something like that happening again. Graham, what about yourself? What's your feeling in DOPS this year?
Well, I'm much the same. When it was first introduced, I thought it was a great idea, and I still do think it's a great idea. I can't really deviate too much from what Stephen's already said. I think as the season went on, the effectiveness of DOPS was called more and more into question. That's just what happens as time elapses and there's more games and there's more incidents to look at. But for me, DOPS became highly inconsistent maybe around about the halfway stage of the season. You had things like, obviously, players playing before any judgments made on a particular incident, and then there's a ban, or DOPS seemed to go on holiday for a week, so nothing was happening, and everybody was wondering what was taking so long. And then, obviously, the inconsistencies really, for me, started to come in the second half of the season. And it's that consistency bit, and you're right, on the basis that you have lots of different people involved from different leagues around the country. I mean, from what I understand, even some of our own officials here are on DOPS panels for other countries, for other leagues. So it's a real mixed bag, and if you're going to have that every other week, then obviously you're going to get those inconsistencies. I think part of the problem as well was I think they did away with the tariffs prior to the season, so everybody was kind of in the dark about what penalty should pick up, what punishment and what have you. And I think they have to reintroduce that. I mean, Todd was right. Todd Kilman was right. He obviously said there needs to be a bit more communication about how DOPS should perform, what the tariffs are, communicate even when there's instances. In fact, I think it was Neil Black that said it, communicate instances where penalties are not handed out, and everybody's left wondering why. Actually communicate why that is. But overall, I think the system is fine. It will hopefully be fine-tuned over next season, and a lot more consistency is what we need to see. If we see that, I don't think we should have any complaints.
Yeah, I think there's an issue of the consistency and length of ban, but for me, as a Clan fan particularly, the major flaw in it came in two instances in November when we played Sheffield, I think on the Friday night. There was an incident. It resulted in Dops managed to get convened within 12 to 16 hours, and Fitzgerald was banned for the next game, which we did go on to win. And that kind of was reflected in a similar instance when we played Belfast. Westgarth was involved in an incident the night before, and then got banned after he played against us. And to me, that kind of struck a bit of inconsistency, and it goes to the heart of the competition, because it does have implications. For example, if Westgarth had managed to score the winning goal that night, which he thankfully didn't, for me, that was a major issue. Do you have any thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, that is a major issue. They always said, Dops, that an incident would be reviewed and a ban would be handed out before the next game. And as you said, as unlikely as it was for Westgarth to score the winning goal, it was strange how they could get everyone together so quickly to ban Fitzgerald and then just drag their feet over that one. It was things like that. And there was as Todd Kellerman mentioned, he said that at the beginning of the season that he recommended that all the tariffs be put up on the EIHL website. And even just a step like that, if they said this incident occurs, then penalty, like 3-game suspension will be handed out unless, a minimum 3-game suspension, say. And for whatever reason, that never went up on the website. And I think that struck a chord with a lot of people, because as fans with no idea what rulings they were based off.
Graham, do you want to say anything about the Westgarth incident?
I shared the same dismay as everyone else, and you're right in terms of the inconsistency about the fact that Westgarth was playing against us. I can remember the Twitter was alive that night about what was happening with it. Again, from my point of view, if you make sure that Dops adhere to the guidelines that are set out, and if it happens to be only 24 hours until the next game when that player's supposed to be playing, then it needs to get sorted for it. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily adhere to all the conspiracy theories about any particular team being unduly favoured, but this is what's going to happen. And if it is as inconsistent as that, there's that word again, inconsistent, then the conspiracy theories are going to run rife. The whole credibility of the process and of Dops itself is undermined. So yeah, it's been a learning year. I do think the clan suffered unduly. But then I'm sure there's plenty of other fans elsewhere of other teams that would say the same. So hopefully, as I say, it's more robust for next season, and that credibility factor can get built up to where it should be.
I'm dreading moving on to the next subject a wee bit, because I've been stuck in a car with Graham going to Nottingham and Sheffield in the last few weeks. We've went over this one before, but Graham, I'll come to you first. The conference system.
Well, you promised me a 3-hour summer special on the conference system. So on the basis that nobody's going to listen to that one, I'll save most of it for later. Yeah, obviously the question was asked by somebody. I can't imagine who that would be, about the conference system and has it run its course. And the responses were by and large, pretty much what was expected. Obviously, Steve Ward of Dundee, he loves the conference system, as you would expect. Todd Kelman was in defence of the conference system, but he had said that right at the very start of the forum that it was probably fortunate that Braehead didn't win the league, because the fallouts that would have been fairly severe. So it was actually a good thing that Braehead didn't win. I might have listened to what he said and interpreted it a certain way to suit myself, but that was certainly how it came across. I think we're having a very different conversation about the conference system now, had Clan won the league, because I think the system would be changing if that had happened, and I'm not sure that will be the case for next season. And Neil Black said something very interesting about the fact that at the outset, Nottingham and Braehead were the two clubs that they didn't vote against it, but they were against the conference system. Obviously, it was a unanimous vote, as was widely reported at the time, and I found that quite interesting, because again, it was a long time ago now, but you hear a lot of different things that in terms of people's views about the conference system and how the whole process came about. And of course, it was only a recent revelation that was acknowledged by Todd Kelman at the forum about the fact that Hull are essentially being compensated to be in the Gardner, which, and I've got to be careful what I say here because I can't remember exactly who it was, but somebody official told me, I think even as publicly as Twitter, that wasn't happening when I was first making my case against the conference system shortly after it was introduced. So whether that's been the case since day one or maybe something that's been introduced after, I'm not quite sure. But I think Neil Back acknowledged the fact that the system wasn't perfect, and I think most people would acknowledge that, and perhaps looking at some kind of getting away from the 8-4 process or series of games, maybe some kind of compromise towards a 7-5, which obviously means that it's an unequal number of games between interconference sides, but then you even it up the next season. I'm not a particular fan of that idea on the basis of just hearing it last weekend. I can see it as being an attempt at a compromise if the league decide to go ahead with it. But essentially, my main issue is not so much the fact that there's a conference there. You can have whatever internal league system that any internal league within a league that you want, as far as I'm concerned. My main bugbear with the whole thing is the fact that I want to see the Clan play the other big teams just as often as the other teams, and to me, the whole thing doesn't quite sit right in terms of agendas and who's benefiting most out of it. So anyway, that's for another day. But yeah, I think there was a pretty very honest and open reaction to what I was saying. Steve Ward obviously made his position perfectly clear, and you can understand where he's coming from. Yeah, as far as evening things up, my big fear about the conference system, just to sort of finish off on this for now. As I say, I think Clan winning the league would have seen some fairly severe changes to the system over the summer. I don't think that's going to happen now. I think we're going to be left stuck with what we've had for the past 3 seasons. I think if they do decide to make any changes, I don't really want it to be just some contrived maths involved where, some games count for a different number of points than other games, which is one of the other things that I've heard about when the idea's been floated about. I think that would just make a bad situation worse. And also it's incumbent on the other Gardner teams to do their bit. Obviously Hull did very well, so I'm kind of excluding Hull from all of that, especially as, in my view, the main victims of the system from the outset. But Dundee managed to fall off a cliff all by themselves despite the conference system, and Edinburgh obviously, despite some upsets and including inflicting some pain on us, it hasn't really helped their crowds. And there's a big deal made about crowds being increasing, and having looked at the figures, I don't have them in front of me, but that does appear to be the case. But some of them haven't increased that much, and Edinburgh certainly crowd-wise have been struggling. And imagine what they would be, obviously, if they didn't have the Clan fans going along every so often to increase those. Okay, that seems to be the main justification for the conference system and why we have the Gardner in the shape that it's in right now. But as I say, just to round off, I hope it changes. I don't think it's going to change for next season, but as far as the forum was concerned, some very interesting points of view came out. And obviously it's something that they discuss all the time at board meetings, but hopefully we'll see some change as a result of that.
I totally understand the reason for the conference system. I think the league is now in a much healthier place financially. Obviously there was stories when Manchester Phoenix were in, they were running out of money every season. It could have been the case. I don't have any information to say that maybe there was a bit of financial struggle, and it was some of the smaller clubs, if you like, that were looking for the conference system. There's obviously the case of Nottingham and Sheffield want to play each other more times because that's a cash cow for them. But I think there's a risk of game fatigue. For example, we played Dundee 10 times this year and we won 19 out of 20 points. I went to all the games bar the final away game in Dundee because by that point I just really had enough of Dundee, and the thought of making the trip up to Dundee again when we'd beaten them more often than not just didn't seem that appealing. And if that's me talking, what's the casual fan saying? However, in saying all that, I don't think we're going to see much change until the league does expand, if it expands. I think it's going to stay much the same way it is just now. I kind of got a bit fed up at the end of the season, other fans chirping when it looked like Clan might just do it. I mean, it's worth pointing out, I think, that we can only play who's put in front of us. The league system was voted on by all the teams in the league. They knew what they were getting. When they first voted for it, they probably didn't think the likes of the Clan or even Dundee last year would get that close. I think that this is the closest it's come. But you've got to look. I mean, Cardiff dropped points in Edinburgh, losing in the shootout twice there. It's all right to call it the easier conference, but they're still got to play what's in front of you. We slipped up in Edinburgh and basically lost the title in Edinburgh. And eventually, in a utopian Elite League system, I think we'd like to see us playing everybody an even number of times. We'll wait and see. I don't know if I'm convinced by the sort of 5 and 7 split. It would make it a little bit fairer, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of gripes all around the league for things like that about being uneven. Stephen, you any thoughts on the conference?
It was season 3 that the conference came in. That was as you both know, that was our disaster season with everything went wrong. It was only last year, really, that I noticed that the conference was uneven for all teams. I'm of the same opinion as Graham. You know, I'm not a fan of the conference at all. And like yourself, Ross, as the person who does the updates, people always seem to think that I have information about things, and always, like, teams of other fans always ask me strange questions, like, why did you agree to this? If you win this league title, it's tainted was the one that went about a lot. And as you said, we can only beat who's in front of us. You know, I don't think there's any Braehead fan that wants to see us in this setup at all. There might be the odd one who thinks the conference is good. And in terms of league stability and, like, helping some of the smaller teams, it seems to have done really well. I want to see us play Belfast and Cardiff and Nottingham more often. I want it to go back to what it was the first 2 seasons, where it was we just played everyone an even amount of times. Do I think it will impact our title chances in the future? Probably. But I would rather have a fairer league where we see all the big teams as often as possible, rather than us playing Dundee and Fife, as much as I love the Fife games, as often as we do. I mean, a rivalry, look at rivalries in football. Man U don't play Arsenal 8 times a season. You know, it's like a big game that happens once or twice a season, which everybody puts in their calendars and looks forward to. I'd rather we had the same thing with Fife again, where we play them 4 times a season, and it's one that we can look forward to more often than not.
Just make a point on that, Ross. I can't remember the exact context of how it was said, but Neil Black did say himself that fans want to go to the big games, and he used the football analogy. I think Arsenal and Liverpool games, for instance, has been the games that people really want to go and see. That's the logic behind, you know, what I'm saying about the clan and the conference system. You know, I think we've done very well crowds-wise. Obviously, we're selling out most games, certainly towards the end of the season. But you want that to continue, and it's not the hardcore fans like us that are the problem. It's bringing in the casual fans. I've got friends who have come to occasional clan games, but they're aware of the conference system, obviously a part of that through myself. But they want to they want to know who the big teams are, and they want to see clan play the big teams. And with Fife, I want Fife to do well, because my problem at the moment is that our perceived big rivalry is with a team that didn't perform that well in the league this season. Okay, individual games, we had good games against them. Certainly had a very good record against them away as well. But I'm not comfortable with that being our big rivalry. I'd rather our big rivalry right now was with, for instance, the Giants, which is a natural rivalry waiting to happen, in my opinion. If Fife spend a bit more money on what's going on in the ice and get their act together and put out a much better team next season, I'll be delighted, because I think we need to be competing on a regular basis with teams that are competing in the top half of the league, and we're not doing that right now. And long term, I think that's detrimental to the clan. I
agree with Graham. We were the only team in the Gardner to finish above the bottom. I think Hull were 7th, and the rest were down for that. The conference does seem a bit uneven. I mean, even moving Belfast and Hull around would have made it a bit better. I know but just to make it more localised, because, as you said, Belfast should be our main rivals. I'm not very good at geography, but I think geographically we're the closest team to them. It's a rivalry that should be happening, and as much as I love to hate Fife, one-sided this season. I think we were 7-1 against them.
Yeah, I think it's 7-2 against Fife this year.
7-2 against Fife. That would be like, there was such a gulf between the two this year. And I agree with you, Graham, that it is a detriment to having a poor Fife team as our rivals. I would rather be either a strong Fife team or one of the bigger teams instead.
You go in the Fife forum and they all kind of like gripe a wee bit about the ownership aren't spending as much money. I mean, we're not going to be in a position to know that, but I'd like to see Fife becoming a bit of a stronger rival. But I think I think you're right. I mean, this is the first year we've actually had a winning record against Belfast. And between the league games and the Challenge Cup games, we came out 4-2. And we've never had a winning record against Belfast before, albeit this is probably for some reason the poorest Belfast team that we've seen in our 5 years. I agree that Belfast should probably be in our conference, but I also understand the reasons that they're trying to avoid it. There was a talk at the fans forum, I think Neil Black mentioned it, that they could swap Belfast and Hull around. I just don't see Belfast wanting to go for that at this stage in time. One of the other things I'd like to touch on that they spoke about at the fans forum was the referees. We've seen last year the likes of Scott Dalglish deciding that he'd had enough. I think the referees generally get a hard time from fans. I think it's got to be one of the hardest sports in the world to referee. It's so fast. Any sport that I've ever watched, when you're watching your team, you've always got, if you like, your purple tinted specs on. You think every call's against you. I just think the fans have to lay off the referees. I think they've got a really, really hard job. I think we've really just got to settle down, give the referees a bit of breathing space, and hopefully the league give them some support to develop. What's your thoughts on the referees, Stephen?
We've got very few what I'd call great referees. There's one or two. Tom Darnell's obviously the best ref in the league. The refs all have their moments, you know. We had, I believe it was Wilson in the quarterfinals, and I thought in the first leg he just sort of lost control of a game that wasn't particularly dirty. Do I think he's the reason we lost? No, I think we shot ourselves in the foot far too often. But I'm lucky in the fact that I've got my Twitter account where I do the game updates and I can rant away about refs, and then I go home and forget about it till the next time, you know. Whereas I think a lot of people see social media as an outlet to sort of abuse the refs. As we've seen recently with one ref in particular at the end of the season was like just completely out of order. You know, I think that's affecting a lot of refs' desire to want to continue doing it. You know, I think that's what Neil Black or Todd Kelman said about Scott Dalglish in particular. He just was fed up of it. If the league is making more money now due to the conference system, I think it's about time that we invested a bit more money into the developments of refs, because there was, I think, Liam Sewell was a ref for one of the friendlies against Asiago, and I thought he had a really great game, and it was announced at the forum that he'd been taken to North America to ref there instead, which is not ideal for a league where the best refs are aging now, you know. So we need to invest a bit, get younger people wanting to ref, and then help them develop.
Graham, what's your thoughts on the referee situation?
Well, I would take the view that the referee situation needs to be drastically improved. I agree with what Stephen was saying about there needs to be far more resource put towards developing and helping the referee standards improve. And whether that's, I think they had a training camp at the start of this season. I don't have the detail on it, but I think they had some kind of training set up brought into place. But, you know, maybe more of the same needs to be involved. But for me, the whole thing's undermined by even things like you can have teams that make a choice between a 4-man and a 3-man system, which to me is wrong. It should be the same for every game within the league. And because, and I think there's a couple of teams at least that have decided that they didn't want to spend the money on a 4-man system, they'd rather spend it on whatever they want to spend it on. And that to me is just ludicrous. To me, the league shouldn't even be giving teams an option, and it should be a 4-man system throughout. I think the 4-man system's the way forward. The other thing, whilst I remember, was that video review was talked about as part of this whole debate, and I think it was Neil Black that said that, again, in fact it was somebody who asked the question who kind of made the statement as well, and Neil agreed with it. For this league to be taken or be regarded as a proper professional league, you should have video review every game, and we don't have that right now. And I forget the exact detail, but I think even the first semi-final last weekend, I think two major decisions were wrong decisions, but which were then subsequently changed by video review. Now, that in itself is an indication of how important video review is. I think the costs were somewhere between 15 and 20 grand for most rinks to be able to install that type of technology. I think Sheffield could do it now if they wanted to. But I think that's another thing which probably needs some investment from the league to make sure that that's happening and is there for every game, because I think that would take a bit of the pressure off the referees. If there's a video review available, obviously it can be misused, but for major things like goals, for instance, I think it's just ridiculous that that things can get missed and there's no video review capability. I think in this day and age that should be, for a professional sport, I think that should be that's a must. But as I say, going back to the officials themselves, yeah, I think more money needs to be spent on the development. And I think it was Todd Kelman that made the point about the fact that a couple of officials within this league have been approached to officiate elsewhere. I think it was Denmark, for more money. Now, if that happens, then with the dearth of good officials that we have right now, that situation's only going to get worse. I think he also made the point about the fact that the International Hockey Federation have a lot more respect for our officials than they have for the league, which was quite a damning statement, even if I think most of us might agree with that. So, but if you had a situation where you might have 2 or 3 officials who are head and shoulders above everyone else, then something needs to be done to bring the overall standard up. So hopefully obviously the league are talking about it, but it's the action that matters. And it'll be interesting to see if anything develops over the summer to make that happen.
I think in touching on the thing about the video review, the cost's going to be prohibitive. I can certainly think of a few teams who'll probably be very reluctant to spend £20,000, I think was the figure mentioned, to install that kind of system. Because at the moment, as you know, with the DOP system, teams can ask for unlimited number of reviews, and some have, albeit they don't always get looked at. It can be reduced by DOPs. They might decide that the other 14 aren't worth looking at. So I think that's something that need to be looked at. And again, I know Leo Black offered to kind of let the league would pay, and there would be some sort of pay up scheme. I just can't see, to be in all honesty, some of the teams that would be willing to put that money out on the table. Stephen, what do you think?
I think it is something that needs to be implemented. I mean, most other leagues in the world have their video review system. I don't think we'd need to do something like Toronto, where they've got people watching all the games. You just phone them up and they tell you what the call is. In the NHL, I think what we need is like what Neil Black said, where we have, or Todd Kilman maybe, 3 on-ice officials, and then you've got 1 off-ice official who does the video review. I mean, we saw how much it could have impacted the game the other day in the Hull Sheffield game if we didn't have the video review, just because the Premier Sports cameras were there. I think it was Tom Darnell that made the decision in one of them. And it would help a lot, especially, I think there was an incident down in Hull this season where we scored a goal and the goal judge, for whatever reason, missed it. And that would have put us 1-0 up, and it could have completely changed the complexion of the game. Whereas I think we went on to lose 4-1 or 4-0. You'll be able to correct me. You're the stats man after all. It's technology like this that can only help the game improve, where we're cutting out in silly mistakes,
Graham, is there anything else from the fans forum that you want to bring up?
Obviously, as Clan fans, one interesting piece of information from Neil Black was the fact that Nottingham and Braehead will both play with 4 lines next season, which ostensibly means we'll have 9 Brits within the roster. So that was an interesting thing that maybe we can have a chat about shortly. There was some view that in order for Brits to be able to develop, they should go abroad. Particularly agree with that, to be honest with you. But then again, if that's the way that they can develop and the GB team becomes better and our Brits become better within the context of the league, then maybe that is the way forward and how you facilitate that. But I think the overall view was that, regardless of import limits changing or whatever, if there's good British players out there, then they'll make it into the team and they won't just sit on the bench. But again, I think most fans would probably be a little bit sceptical about that at this moment in time.
Touching on the 4-line hockey, I mean, the coaches would ever use that 4th line very regularly, but it's not that far away. I mean, this year we had 10 forwards. We've got an increase of 1 import this year. That would only really mean having to sign 1 extra player, and you've got 12 forwards to play 4 lines of 3. I can't ever see in the near future signing 8 D-men, so I think you would still have, your 3 sets of 2 in defence, and that would only really mean 20 players. And as I say, at the moment, certainly last season, we had 10 forwards, so it only really means 2 more more increase in personnel to play four-line hockey. Now, in my opinion, in four-line hockey in the league is, how often is Ryan going to trust that fourth line, especially when the game's in the line? Sometimes you see the teams coming down to two-line hockey when it gets down to the end of a close game. So I'm not really fully convinced by Neil's assertion that Nottingham and Braehead will play four-line hockey. They may well have enough players to play four-line hockey, but whether they actually use them very often, I'm yet to be convinced. Stephen?
I agree with that. I mean, we've shown last season that, as you were touching on, if a Brit is good enough, they will get the ice time in Zach Sullivan. And obviously we pulled off a major signing coup yesterday with Jordan County. So we are willing to give young Brits the chance to come here and develop, but is there enough to the players like that out there to run four lines consistently? I don't think so. I agree with you. I think it was more a case of we'll have enough personnel to play four lines, but unless it's a comfortable win or the game's over with the last couple of minutes, I can't see them getting enough shifts, like a consistent shift. But it's caused a lot of controversy, this one, with everyone like disagreeing about what this actually means, and a few people were saying that people were taking what Neil Black said out of proportion. But if they said that, I can't see them just saying it just as a service and a fan forum, you know. I think we will have the 20 to 22 players that people are talking about, especially with the CHL next season, which has a 22 player limit.
We can have a quick look back at the season that we had. I mean, generally speaking, guys, how did you feel the season went?
Well, let's be honest about it. The season was, if you'd taken the season in terms of finishing second, 1 point off the league title, winning the conference early, okay, not making it to the playoffs, not making it through to the Challenge Cup semi-final, I think you would be happy with the overall league performance. I'm talking on here obviously about on ice. I think off ice things have been tremendous in terms of crowds and what have you. On ice, for me, the first half of the season I think was excellent. I think we really basically played above what most people's expectations of how the Clan would do. We got some significant victories against some very big opponents. January was helped, obviously, as you intimated, by the fact that we played most of our games against other Gardner Conference teams. So that helped spur us on further, whilst other league opponents were dropping points left, right and centre. How it finished, obviously, which I think for me personally started with losing against Coventry in the Challenge Cup game. That was the start of where we really struggled. Why we struggled, there's all sorts of theories and debates over what happened towards the end of the season. Non-Clan opinion is that we simply bottled it. My opinion is we ran out of steam. I think certainly in the last few weeks, I know for a fact we had a lot of players that were playing through injury. To the extent that some of them probably shouldn't have been playing. That's not my judgment, but that's how it seems to me. So I think the lack of depth within the squad was catching up with us by that point, and that was a major contribution to how we struggled towards the end of the season. But overall, the season has been great. As I say, from the point of view of the media profile of the club, seeing the TV coverage that we've had up here through, leading the league. We were on STV Sport every Monday night. Okay, just for a minute, but just to get that kind of exposure is a major step forward for us, and that was only possible because we were leading the league at the time. So that's generated that kind of media interest. So that was great. But yeah, sad end to the season, obviously, and I think hopefully we can deepen the squad for next season, because I think that's a major factor that affects us towards the end, and learn from the lessons from this season and move it on. But overall, I look back on this past season as a success. Shame how it ended. Real shame that we didn't get through to the playoffs, obviously, but certainly as a stepping board onto greater things for next season, then yeah, fantastic.
And Stephen, what about you? How did you feel the season went?
If you'd said to me at the beginning of the season that we'd win the conference easily, we'd finish second in the league by a point, I would have bitten your hand off. You know, it's like we've made such big strides in 5 short years. It's unbelievable. As I touched on earlier, it was only 2 years ago where we finished 8th, and it was like a horrible season, you know. But in terms of this season, I can see Graham's points, and I can see the points of people who are disappointed. You know, it's like loads of people are really excited. We're top of the league for so long, and to just let it slip away at the end by a point, some people took it pretty badly, you know. I think that on a whole, the season off ice was fantastic, and I've got loads of brilliant memories of on ice performances from this season. I can't wait for next season, really, just to see where Finner can take this core of players that he's talking about signing and what he can add to it, and hopefully that we're challenging for the title again, and maybe this time go the extra step and actually win it.
I felt the season was a success. I felt fans' expectations maybe did get a wee bit ahead of themselves. It was nice to be in that position. When we started the season, I always felt our goals were to win the conference back first and foremost, and to get down to the playoff weekend. Obviously we didn't manage to get down to the playoff weekend. I just felt, like Graham said, we just kind of ran out of steam. The players, we were at the dinner on the Tuesday night after the Hull game, and you could see the number of players that were hobbling about, and as Graham says, whether they were fit enough to be playing, obviously the hockey players, they don't want to be sitting out if they can be playing. That's another story. I felt we just were carrying too many niggly injuries towards the end of the season. I know Graham and myself certainly travelled down to Sheffield and Nottingham, where we really didn't show up to either of the games, to be honest. The team just didn't look like the team that were prior to the new year. They just didn't look like the same team. Obviously, the Edinburgh result, it's just one of these things. I don't think any team has a divine right to win every single game they play. And as I pointed out earlier, other teams have dropped points in Edinburgh. The timing of it, people could argue, was unfortunate. But again, I just think it came down that we struggled over the finishing line. At the end of the day, though, I'm quite happy with the season. I think it was a success both on and off the ice. Certainly, talking to a few of the players at that Tuesday night, a lot of them seemed really down. They seemed as if they felt they'd let the fans down. And my response to that simply was, listen, there's no pressure on you guys. We're still a new team. Generally, the fan base is not that expectant. They're quite happy to have good hockey played. They're quite happy to be up there challenging. It's a bit of a bonus that we were so far up in the league. But that's my opinion anyway.
I agree with what you were saying there. And the fan base, I don't think that the hardcore fans are as expectant. Obviously, as the team got more successful, we're picking up a few more casual fans. Where I sit in Upper C, there was like different people round about me every week. I think me and my friend are the only two that had a season ticket in that section. And I think some of the newer fans, especially from the west of Scotland, where football is the dominant sport, and it's where the two big teams are from, I think there is more of an expectation from the casual fans. But as I was saying, a young team, you know, we've got plenty of years to be challenging and winning trophies. So just for the first time of getting so close and getting a wee taste of potential success has really set us up for the future.
Graham, what individual players would you mention and from the past season there?
Well, it's an interesting one. You and I had the conversation in the car on the way down to Nottingham, I think it was, about who, you know, this season, if you had to drop some players, who would you drop? And it was a real struggle, and certainly no meeting of minds. There was different opinions, and I still have that view, to be honest with you. I think in terms of the team overall, I'm really struggling to pick out anybody who I think hasn't performed. They've all done their job. As far as particular performances that are worthy of a merit, if you like, I think the likes of Stefan Meyer. He's been a joy to watch. Lee Salters actually got off to a bit of a slow start at the start of the season. Personally speaking, I think he maybe just struggled to fit into the system. But then once the points started flowing, then that was it. He was off, and it was tremendous to watch. And that whole first line, I dearly hope that we manage to get it back for next season. Whether that happens or not, we'll find out. But Salters and Meyer, for me, certainly standouts up front, although obviously when you've had the likes of Trim and Pitt generating fantastic points, and again, great players to watch. Faded a bit as the season came to a conclusion. Obviously, if they come back, I think Neil Trim's on a 2-year contract, so I'd be expecting to see him back. But if we get either of them back or both of them back, then fantastic. If they can contribute the same points and consistently right through the season, then that's going to be we're going to be a very formidable proposition up front again. As far as in defence, Jamie Fritsch for me was a revelation. Didn't know anything about him when he came into the team, and he has been fantastic and extremely consistent right through. And what can you say about someone like Zach Sullivan, for instance? I mean, just again, came in, didn't really know nothing very much about the lad, and he has been an absolute revelation, and he's getting the recognition that he deserves. And looking forward to seeing him again in a purple jersey next season. Yeah, see, I'm not going to talk about every single player, but I think, yeah, they all did their job. Zach Fitzgerald, I'd like to see back. I think he's solid and great character as well. Matt Keith, I think, a lot of debate about the captaincy from certain Clan fans. He's a man. Delighted he's coming back again for a second year. No problems with that at all. And then, of course, Kyle Jones, who, again, debate has raised furiously, and obviously there's no doubting the opinion that Finner has of him. He's had an excellent season. I don't think you can doubt it. I think he was eclipsed towards the end by one or two others. Obviously, Brian Stewart had a fantastic performance towards the end of the season and capping it with an unbelievable performance during the playoffs. But Kyle Jones has been consistent. He has been a massive part of the success that we've had this season. There's some news on Twitter, not news, but some debate on Twitter this morning about whether or not he's retiring. I heard those rumours a while back about whether or not he's retiring. If he comes back and he's with us, I'll be delighted. If not, then yeah, I'm sure obviously there's the same or better available out there. But yeah, as I say, the Brits, Ben Davis, Matt Haywood, Tristan Harper, Lee Esders, just a fantastic bunch of Brits. A bit worried that we might not see Ben Davis back. His parting Twitter sounded a little bit final to me, but time will tell. But yeah, with us needing a good complement of Brits, obviously going into next season, I'd love to get them all back. Good overall team performance, and really genuinely struggling to think who I would leave out.
I think I would agree with most of what you said there. A couple of things I'd like to expand on. Kyle Jones had, in terms of seasons for a Clan goaltender, he had probably the best season we've ever had. I mean, I'd heard it been mentioned that last year he was still studying for his degree. This year he was able to concentrate fully on his play. I think a lot of things that fans don't get to know about is the actual influence players have behind the scenes. And certainly what I'm being told is the major influence Zach Fitzgerald is having on the guys, and in a positive way. And I think the same can be said for Matt Keith. Matt Keith, for me, is the best two-way player I've ever seen at Braehead in our 5 years. A number of times you'll see him tracking back, sticking that stick out, getting a poke check and getting the puck, and next thing you know, we're back in the attack again. I've lost count the number of times I've seen him doing that. And he's also led the team in assists this year. I'm not particularly, I know you're referring to somebody saying he's not captain material. I don't get it. I don't agree with it. I think he certainly leads by example. And from what I'm hearing, he's certainly well respected in the dressing room. The team picked the captain at the end of the day. They've picked him. It didn't harm him when he chucked his 5 scarf in the bin when he got home the other day as well. That would have went down with the fans. What about yourself, Steve? And then you want to add to the players?
I'll start off by admitting I was wrong. I thought when we re-signed Jones that we could have done better, and I've never been more happy in my life to say that I'd completely misread the situation. Thought Jones was absolutely fantastic this year. I don't know if that, as you touched on, he was studying last year, but also I think he had a much better and more settled defence in front of him this year. I mean, last year we signed a couple of players that didn't work out, just got injured, and then we were scrambling to find replacements. Whereas this year, the likes of Fitzgerald and Frank and Fritsch, who I thought was absolutely outstanding, and Arson, what we knew we were going to get with him, they were just a settled unit in front of him when they weren't suspended. Or I think Kavanagh's the only one that really struggled this year with injury. So I was glad with how Jones did, and we did ride on the back of him for a lot of the season, just to push us over games where we looked like might be slipping away, like Belfast where we won 1-0, with Jones was absolutely outstanding that night. I'm a big fan of Salters. As you said, we knew what we were going to get from him. We saw him a couple of times when he played against us for Nottingham last year, and as Graham touched on, it was a bit of a slow start from him. But I think you can pinpoint the success of the first two lines down to Salters. When Trim and Pitt were on fire, it was Salters who was on the line with them. When Keith and Meyer started picking up as well, is when Salters was on the line with them. So I think he was a big component on towards our success, and some of the hits that he laid in as well were absolutely fantastic. Just a big, strong player who can do it all, really. You know, he's like one of the best all-rounders in the league last season. Again, with Keith, I genuinely don't know why people don't think he's captain material at all. I don't understand it. Some people are putting down our slump at the end of the season to a lack of leadership, which just don't get. As you said, with Fitzy and Finner and Keith in the team, I don't see where the lack of leadership would be coming from. But yeah, it was a great season. As Sullivan was the find of the season last year. I think nobody knew anything about him coming in. Everyone just expected him to be here to make up the numbers, and he went about his business, kept his head down and just got stuck in. It's just fantastic find, and I'm hoping that we can help develop him a bit more next season.
Yeah, I'll give you a wee stat or two just to back up your point about the defence, which is a very good point. The defence was in front of Jones. Over the last 5 years, this is our goals conceded average from season 1 onwards: 3.25, 3.25, 3.81, 3.18, and this season 2.65. That's a big drop, and I think it's one of the big reasons that we probably did have the successful season. And I know you'll get fans from other clubs saying, yeah, but you were playing Fife and D, you were playing them more often than if you were playing Sheffield and Nottingham, your average wouldn't be so high. But if you look at the conference system came in 3 years ago, we were 3.81. Now we all know that was our bad season, but last year we had a good season. We didn't win the conference, but we did get to the playoff final. We were still over 3 goals conceded a game. So it's quite a big drop to 2.65, so it's a good point that you're making about the defence, Stephen. I sat next to Kyle Jones. He was at my table at the end of the year awards dinner, and I'll give you an exclusive. He took a pint off me in the condition it was a binding contract to come back, so I'll be very disappointed if he's broke that contract. I think another person we need to mention, and we haven't really talked about him much, is Chris Frank. Obviously that's him retired. Now we won't be seeing him back in the UK playing hockey. Graham, what's your thoughts on Chris Frank's 2 years with the Clan?
Thanks for that. No, I am a fan of Chris Frank. To be honest with you, I still have this outstanding memory of Chris Frank. I think when he played for Cardiff, and I can remember giving him a hard time at the time because frankly I just thought he was a mental case with Cardiff. I can always remember it was a kind of highlight reel on Sky Sports at the end of every programme, and inevitably there was a fight involving Chris Frank that was there. So when he joined the Clan, I'll be honest with you, I was very, very, very sceptical, and I was proven wrong. And don't get me wrong, I think on occasions the red mist factor obviously affected things and affected us. It's debatable about whether that was even, against that game against Hull during the playoff semi-final. Not semi-final, sorry, quarter-final. But when he got sent off and then Hull scored, obviously, shortly afterwards with a few seconds to go. I think, a lot of fingers were pointed at Chris Frank then. And I think on occasions he probably didn't help us picking up some long-term bans, but we knew what we were getting with them, and people were quick to point that out when he was signed. You've got a player that plays on the edge, and that has a good side and it has a bad side. But as far as the type of character that he was, the kind of emotions that he produced from people, and, let's face it, the sort of player that puts bums on seats, he did his job and he did it well. So I'm sorry to see him retire. I wouldn't have minded seeing him stay on at the Clan, but at the end of the day, as long as we bring in somebody who is of a similar type of nature, that kind of agitator type role, which I'm sure Finner will be looking at, then fine. But fond memories of Chris Frank as a Clan player, and I wish him all the best.
I've got to put my cards on the table. I love Frankie. I've always loved Frankie. There was a few times I can remember, particularly in Cardiff in an overtime game. I think there was a slash and we went down to 3, and but you've got to take the rough with the smooth with Chris Frank. And if you remember rightly, for the first 3 years we were getting pushed about the ice. We didn't really have a player like Chris Frank. I mean, people will talk about Kyle Bruce, but he just wasn't in the same sort of league. And even Chris Frank, it wasn't really his, I don't think it was his natural role to be an enforcer as such, but he came in that fourth season and just, he stopped us getting pushed about a wee bit more. And I've always liked him. I think he's been really, really good for the clan. As I say, you take that off with the smooth with a player like that. I'm just sad. I'd love to have seen him coming back for a year, because when his head was in the game, which was most of the time, he was a very, very good defender, and he was something you could rely upon. Obviously, when they brought Zach Fitzgerald in this year, Lee Salters, another player that won't be pushed around, the clan were a tough team this year. And I think it's a style of play that we hadn't really seen before. And I think it's a style of play where we were really all crying out for, which is why I don't get the outcry from some clan fans against Chris Frank, because he's exactly the type of player we needed at the time we needed him, and he came in the fifth year and he's consolidated it. I've got nothing but admiration for Chris Frank, to be honest. Stephen, what's your thoughts?
As soon as he signed last year, I knew that I was going to get him in the back. I've got him in the back of my season 4 jersey. As you pointed out, he's the sort of player we'd been crying about from season 1. I'd never forget the playoff quarter final at Braehead in season 1, where I think it was David Clark of Nottingham grabbed Dominic Noel and dragged him all the way to centre ice and just started punching him right in the face. From that point on, we've always needed someone like Chris Frank. And as you said, when he was on his game, he was really, really good. He had that period this season where he went like 7 or 8 games without taking a minor penalty, and he was absolutely fantastic at the back when someone was struggling. I was sceptical when we signed Fitzgerald as well, because I was wondering where both of them would fit in, and even a bit at the beginning of the season, they seemed to be playing on a defensive line together. I can't remember if it was like that at the end of the season as well, and it was obviously it would intimidate the other team's players, but I thought that was, with both of them playing on the edge, that could be a mistake waiting to happen. But I love Frank as well. I'll admit it, I love Frank. I've got a bit frustrated with him at certain points, but as you said, you need to take it off with the smooth. And as that type of player we were crying out for years, you know, I was delighted when we got him.
That's bringing me on to another point I think I discussed before with Graham. The clan took a disproportionate amount of penalties in the first half of the season than they did in the second. And I'm wondering, was that Fitzgerald and Frank laying down a marker to all the other teams at the start of the season that don't mess with us? You won't be messing with Braehead Clan anymore. Do you think that was a deliberate ploy, Graham?
100%, yes. I remember tweeting it on a number of occasions. I think that was exactly it, sending a message out to the rest of the league. As you rightly said earlier, we had a reputation of being a skillful but ultimately soft team that could be possibly intimidated. Definitely the message was that that's not going to happen anymore. And it was quite noticeable the style of play against us. Certainly in the second half of the season, where we didn't have that many opposition players trying to start anything, because they knew what would happen. Very noticeable change in things. Okay,
now Ryan Finnerty has signed again for another 2 seasons. I'm delighted with that. I think the continuity we had for the last season, having the same coach for the first time for 2 years in a row, was of major benefit. Ryan appears to like being here. He seems to have taken the club to heart. Stephen, how do you feel about Ryan?
I think he's great. You know, I'm really glad that we've got him signed up again. When he first was announced, or there was a load of rumours when he got let go from Sheffield that after our previous season we were going to go for him. And at first I was a bit sceptical about it. Everyone's got the opinion of Finner, well, opposition fans anyway, that, you know, he doesn't take particular things well, and I was of the same opinion, especially when the rumour was we were going to get John DeCaro as goalie as well. But I'm really glad to, again, a shock horror, I was wrong again, you know. I'm really glad that he likes it here, and I'm hoping that this is just the second of many 2-year contracts that he signs with us.
Graham, what about yourself?
Yeah, again, I'll be honest. I was sceptical when Finner was announced as coach. I had a similar kind of opinion in terms of temperament. To be honest with you, I wanted Paul Gardner to stay on. I felt he wasn't given a chance in season 3. He was coaching damaged goods, and with his wealth of experience, I was kind of looking forward to seeing what he might be able to do with the team. So for that reason alone, I was a little bit sceptical. Wasn't over the moon about Finner coming on board as coach. But, I wouldn't have anyone else. Thanks very much. Love the way he works. I know from a number of times when I've sat behind the bench at Fife, for instance, just seeing how he interacts with the players, how he is during the game, and also talking to players and what they say about him. I mean, that's all you need to hear, the respect that he commands from the players, how he put that team together. I always remember him saying about the fact that he didn't necessarily want the best players, he wanted the best players in terms of a team. I think we'd all acknowledge the fact that certainly, especially this year, as a unit, we've had a hell of an outfit, and you just have to see the interaction between these guys to see the sort of team that he's assembled. So from that point of view, yes, 100% converted to the Finner cause. Delighted that he has signed on again, more so even for the fact that it's another two-year deal, which sends a great message out to all the Clan fans, and maybe not quite the message that fans of other teams maybe wanted to hear. The continuity aspect is vital, and you're right in terms of the fact that we benefited from having him as our first second-year coach is great. So going beyond that, I think, is even better news. And let's be honest about it, he's developing as a coach himself. He's had, what did he have, 2 years in the Goldfish Bowl of Sheffield? And he's talked about enjoying life much more within Braehead, and that's undoubtedly been a major part of him re-signing. And I think it's just great. I think to have a guy like him who is still developing as a coach and getting better. I think this year he's proved himself 100%. I think as a team, as a club, we're on to bigger and better things next season. So yes, absolutely delighted.
Yeah, I think one of my taglines during my Photoshop stuff was, don't give us sexy Nielsen hockey, give us hard-nosed Finnerty hockey. And that's exactly the colour hockey I like to watch. So I'm really chuffed he's back. The only other thing I think we haven't touched on again was the news yesterday that we'd signed Jordan Cowney. Graham, comments for that?
Yeah, I don't know that much about him. I've looked at his stats on Elite Prospects, and his stats speak for themselves. I think it's just going by the reaction of other people. The Twitter reaction to him signing has been excellent, so I think you have to take a lot from that. And certainly an up-and-coming prospect. I think he played, 2 or 3 games for Panthers last season, if I remember correctly.
2 Elite League games, yeah.
2 Elite League games, and I recall at the time the feedback on him was very good. The feedback from Panthers fans about the fact that they hope to have him, again, you can read quite a lot into that. But yeah, I think obviously another EPL pickup. If he's anywhere near as successful as Zach Sullivan's been for us this past season, then absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure he'll prove himself. I'm sure he'll get the ice time that he needs to develop as well, as Zach Sullivan got. So, yeah, happy days as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's nice to have another Scottish boy in the team. Stephen, your thoughts on Jordan?
I think it's a great signing. We're at a disadvantage compared to other teams where we're not in a position where we can develop our own players as yet. So, I think that we can now offer players like Cowney the opportunity to come up here, using the Zach Sullivan as an example of if you're good enough, you'll get the ice time. I think that this is the best strategy for us just now, rather than like overspending on a top line Brit from Belfast or Sheffield, who I'm not convinced would want to come to us anyway. I think Davis was a bit of a exceptional circumstance last year with the whole Cardiff thing going down. But yeah, as much as I'd love someone like a Colin Shields or a Craig Peacock here, I'm glad that we're able to offer the younger players a chance to come and make their name, and hopefully he'll be here for a long time.
So there you have it, our first Purple Army podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get involved next season or have any questions, ideas, suggestions, drop us a line on the forum at www.purplearmy.rocks. Contact myself on Twitter at Clanstats, Graham at Clantastic, or Stephen at Stephen_ClanFans. And we'll see you all next time.